Welcome to the Actionable ESG Talk series brought to you by AKFI, the Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit industry association committed to bridging the gap between ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. Actionable ESG Talk series bring together great minds to discuss the current state and the future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. And should I add AI to be in tone with the trend. I'm delighted to be here with Peter Bolstorff, sorry, and wanted to invite him to, after introducing Peter as a seasoned entrepreneur and a global supply chain executive with over 30 years of experience transforming operations across consumer products, chemical, aerospace, defense, pharmaceutical, and industrial manufacturing and consumers electronics, and the author for Supply Chain Excellence that I'm sure we'll cover today, and also the author and the lead into SCOR-based projects that we'll again talk about today. So we have a lot of grounds to cover.
Yep.
Without further ado, we usually start with a trends question. So what do you see in supply chain sustainability, especially with the changes we have in tariffs, supply chain procurement, and so on?
So good question. Thanks for the opportunity, Manuel. I was looking forward to this, and I'm not a sustainability expert, but I've been in the trenches of supply chain for a long time, so have a pretty good view of things from the street. And I think in kind of addressing your first question on the trends, I think there's the trends that you see in social media and the trends that you see from all of the consulting folks. But when we think about boots on the ground, I think the trends that I'm seeing right now are more sophisticated means of connecting the dots between supply chain and sustainability. And then if you want to throw digital transformation, and AI as part of that digital transformation, I think it's how do you connect the dots? And as an example, there's been a lot of investment in digital capabilities and supply chain, the last, decades. And even today, organizations are only using about 30% of what they purchased, 5 years ago. And so there's this enormous appetite to both simplify and leverage, capabilities that they own, and then extend them into making an impact on their sustainability initiatives.
So you mentioned connecting the dots. Would you like to share a couple of the big dots?
I have a picture that's worth 1,000 big dots, right? So
okay,
yeah,
let's
if you
go
don't
for it.
mind. Now, for those that are watching that are fearful that I'm going to get in a SCOR tirade, don't fear. That's not my MO. So I'm very much a practical oriented person. So I think if you just look at the top, Manuel, I think the dots people are trying to connect with sustainability and digital transformation are, basic supply chain processes, as you see illustrated here, and I'll talk in a minute about those. They're trying to connect the dots on processes to performance, to practices, and then ultimately to, how are we, managing people and developing people. And so if I might take just a small moment to kind of give you kind of a high level, here's the big dot, that's important.
Okay.
All right. For those of you that are watching, this is available, score.ascm.org. Again, you can click there now if you want to follow along, no problem. But let me start with, the process piece. And again,
and before even we go to the process, for the people that are unfamiliar with SCOR, maybe Can you tell us a little bit
Sure.
about it?
Yep. So SCORE stands for Supply Chain Operations Reference Model. It was first launched in 1996 via PRTM and AMR research through an association, a trade association at that time called the Supply Chain Council. And it at the time was the first time that we were able in one reference model, if you will, to be able to combine and connect those dots that you see here. And along with that, organizations were then able to benchmark each piece, benchmark processes, benchmark performance, benchmark, competencies, benchmark, practice maturity. So it's been very popular. In 2014, the Supply Chain Council was acquired by Apex at the time, and has consequently again gone through a number of other improvement iterations until you see it today. So it is intended to be referential, and it's intended to be able to level the language of supply chain across the enterprise, and then across trading partners too, as you get through that one. So it is again considered the global standard in supply chain reference. Yeah. So, and again, as you mentioned, I authored a book called Supply Chain Excellence. The book is now in its third edition and really focuses on the application of SCORE. How do I actually use it in my organization to make an impact on sustainability, on supply chain performance, on a number of different factors. So,
okay.
Yep.
Please continue.
Yeah. So again, just as a reference, most of the things that I'll share is just based on about 250 projects, that I've had the opportunity over the last 30 years to actually implement inside of different organizations. So it's a lot of lessons in the School of Hard Knocks. So the first big dot I want everybody to think through is this idea around kind of the new concept in supply chain processes. So there's really two dimensions to it, centered by this process called orchestrate. And if you think about the horizontal axis, blocking and tackling supply chain. So we have the demand side, which is order and fulfill. You have the supply side, which is source or transform or make. I think that's very traditional. I think the vertical axis was a result of trying to think through how do I connect the big dots in sustainability to supply chain. So this idea around planning for the synchronization of a regenerative supply chain. It used to be before that, people are just thinking about, well, if I just return it better or more efficiently or more effectively, I'm thinking through that. So again, the first big dot to connect is that supply chain at its center is trying to orchestrate the synchronization of a regenerative supply chain. And I think that's the first thing to think through. And just to give you one more level of view, again, orchestrate was brand new in this launch of the SCORE model 3-4 years ago, when ESG and sustainability was gaining, I'll call it early momentum. So if we click again, for those of you, I'm just navigating orchestrate, and you look down at the processes, the level 2 processes underneath that one, you can see that there are 2 dedicated to ESG type activity. And so if I click on the one, you can see on the right, and what do I mean by that? Here are the processes, that would describe how the supply chain would orchestrate its supply chain strategy with the ESG initiatives.
And the question may be here because, yes, we talk about ESG, environmental, social, and governance, but many people also in supply chain and in industries and in business talk about sustainability. which is also adding the profitability. So I was wondering if in the orchestration process, we also touch on the financial aspects.
I do. That's the second big dot I'll get to in just a minute with performance. So you're thinking ahead, Manuel.
Thank
The
you.
other process that to me as relate to sustainability is this idea around circular supply chain management. And when we think about the massive scope of this potential, it's essentially looking at each SKU, through the lens of these, 6 processes on and how those products are put, the recipes or the SKU or the BOM or the makeup of the product, and then how do I actually then bring it through, the source, the transform, order, and fulfill. So I think these are 2 big processes within Orchestrate that are important to sustainability as we think about the processes. So first big dot. Second big dot, performance. So when we think about performance in SCOR, again, navigationally, I'm just going to scroll down to where the graphic is the easiest. There are 3 big buckets: resilience, which includes reliability, responsiveness, and agility. There's economic factors for cost and profit and assets. And then within sustainability, that category, which was newly introduced in this version of SCOR, there are 5 major categories of performance. Again, material used, energy consumed, water consumed, emissions, and then waste generated. And then within the social aspect, diversity, inclusion, wage level, and training. So that's getting back to your question you just asked, is how do we start thinking about the second big dot as supply chain, is impacting sustainability. And I think this is what the supply chain would look at as sustainability or environmental impact, right? So
it looks like a 360 degrees on sustainability between the elements, right?
yep.
The orchestration.
And I think when the volunteers that were helping put this together, again, many of them had already been part of standards organizations within sustainability, and so a lot of these metrics, again, weren't originally developed by the supply chain community. It was, here's metrics that the sustainability community has adopted as important, and then here's how we would fit it into the SCOR schema, if you will.
Okay.
What I wanted to do is just to give you a sense, if I go down to the environmental, again, you'll see here's kind of the level 1, but it also has kind of decomposable level 2 metrics. So renewable materials used, non-renewable, and again, each one has a different set of level 2 metrics as a guideline. Again, just from a referential standpoint. So if somebody asks the question, gosh, how does supply chain and sustainability, connect? We've got some process connection, and then we also have performance connections.
And if I understand correctly, this model is horizontal to the supply chain. So if we think of companies being a vertical, this is the horizontal, this is the connector, this is the orchestrator among all the elements of a supply chain.
Right. So again, if you think about materials used as an example, let's just say the largest user of materials is going to be a manufacturing plant, as an example, right? And so the way the sustainability slices across that is, within the factory, we have to pay attention to, are they making enough on time? Are they agile enough in terms of being able to respond to fluctuating demand? Are they making it at the cost that they targeted? Are they producing it at the yield that they had planned? And then the facility itself has to be able to say, are we also meeting our renewable material, target? Are we
Mhm.
consuming energy at the proper rate? And so I think there's kind of the two aspects, that kind of intersect at the plant, right?
Right.
You'd have the same
Right.
thing at a distribution center. You'd have the same thing, um, probably, at a headquarters or an administrative building, those things of that nature.
So if we take the SCOR model in sort of a discussion about data flows, is the fair question to ask how data flows or the data flows are between uh, the suppliers and their customer, right?
Boy, that is a great question. So let me just go back. We'll go back to the big picture. So when you think about just how this operates, and they're infinity loops for a reason, right? These days, with the level of technology and the digital capabilities that people are investing in right now, and then how fast technology can calculate, um, you know, things get done all at the same time. And I think
Mhm.
as people get better at using the technology that they have with fewer interfaces, again, anytime you put a break in an interface in the middle of data flow, you end up with transcription error potential.
Right.
So as people continue to simplify and they get better at this, I think the focus, again, when we think about planning, let's just use planning as an example. When we get to planning, and I'm thinking about planning not just for the right amount of product at the right time, but having it transported in the way that I had also planned, which is in support of our sustainability, targets. So I think
Right.
as technology and data flow becomes more transparent, organizations are able to do more what if scenarios that include factors in performance and sustainability, as we just looked at. Um,
I, I think you mentioned two sides of the coin, right? One is strategy, looking into the future and using the
mhm.
acquired data to model, right? I'm avoiding the word predict the future. And on the other hand, you have the reporting element and you have the real-time element built with it. You mentioned data collection now with Internet of Things
Yeah,
can definitely be pushed to real time in almost infinite dimensions to match your slide.
exactly. And I think if I were to look at the common horizons, you've got, as you described, you've got your strategic horizon. And those strategic horizons are, where do I want to do business, and what is my strategy for the product? Do I want to source all locally? Do I want to source in a low cost environment? Those are big deals, right? And I think those decisions have a lot to do with, the sustainability of the future, right? So, and then the
Sure.
second, and then the second one is really that, and for those that are in supply chain, it's really that rolling 12 to 18 month view that says, now that I know what I'm selling where, how do I budget for it, and how do I make sure that I'm, attaining those goals with that product in that particular region. And then there's the next dimension, which is tactical, and that's just a matter of, within the lead time to get the materials from the supplier to our, transformation and, get it back out to customers, that tactical, and then there's the day-to-day, I'm scheduling today and tomorrow. We had something happen, we don't have enough labor, or something happened. That whole scheduling and kind of in your face this week, kind of time horizon.
And I see the model also being dynamic, especially when you have external factors such as tariffs and rearranging, competition, conflict, we can call it whatever we want,
Yeah.
between suppliers and the countries of supply and versus the country of customers, of users. So
Well, I
So
want to go back to the orchestrate processes again. I
yes,
think you hit on another one that's really, really important is risk. So
yes,
when you think about risk and you think about how do I effectively scan the environment, identify these risk events, quantify it, and do something about it. Um, again, network
and
design. Where do I want to source from based on where I want to sell to? Again, all of these things have a sustainability slice, as we think about
absolutely.
performance. Yep.
Actually, going a little bit deeper on what you're just showing, it has a direct impact in double materiality and the requirements from SASB to report on double. Not only the requirements are from actually the CSRD and from
Right.
regulators to report according to SASB, most of them actually. The double materiality, the material impact that is creating by the risk, as you said, and the changes that come with sustainability. Because we start to change to look at, you mentioned rare earths as an example, right?
Right.
So all these are material events.
Yep. And I think the other factor, again, and I'm going to move on to the digital transformation piece just for a minute. We talked about data information and technology, right? So the big question is today is how do I leverage technology, so data and systems that I've invested in the future to be, more and better, so that I can start to get the return that was promised, from the past. And I think I'm finding there's, a number of organizations that are tasting the technology of the future, but they still have this under the ice, under the water iceberg still of legacy stuff. And
Sure.
and I think sustainability, the question becomes there is as people are building data and systems to be able to measure quantitatively, their sustainability impact. The hope is that those things can become integrated at a, what if scenario kind of a standpoint, or, being able to model different futures, depending on decisions that are made, not just on products that are currently in play, but also future products, that people are thinking about in future geographies.
Absolutely. And if you allow me, um, most companies look at or started to look at sustainability as the reporting piece, the ESG
Right.
reporting regulations, tougher regulations, relaxed regulations, deregulations. We have everything in sustainability these days. But overall, it started with reporting, which it's looking at the past by definition. You know, and now sustainability must become part of, especially in the supply chain, and I'll explain why, must become part of strategy. Because as well, you said orchestration, and let's use the metaphor of an orchestra, right? Let's say you have a conductor that takes Beethoven to conduct Beethoven, and the orchestra has the play sheets for Mahler, or you pick up your preferred. Uh, and and imagine what's going to happen, right? It's not a pretty, definitely not a pretty scene where the orchestra goes one direction, that will be the supply chain, and the conductor, the customer, thinks he has a different play sheet. And to connect that to sustainability, that begs strategy. You know, the orchestra has to meet before and say, hey, what are we going to play today? You know, we start from part two, section one. You know, you guys beat the drums, you guys play the violin or whatever, and so on. Otherwise, and this is how I see the orchestration of SCOR. When you as I said, when you look at sustainability, you have to look at reporting, important, fines, complex, and so on, which requires historical data. And then you have to take this data and use it for projecting to strategy. And I can see how SCOR and orchestration can play a big role in this. Is the what if that you said.
Well, and I think emissions is a good one, so as you think about the different scope levels of emissions, I think one of the simple concepts that people are migrating to is, how many miles does a product and its bill of materials travel, right?
Absolutely.
And so you think about sourcing from Asia, bringing it to North America, doing something with it, moving it back to Asia to sell in Europe, and so I think this whole idea around, miles of movement is a good, and that could include, things that would be your suppliers, again, movement miles as well. So I think as people
Sure.
get better measurement systems to be able to track things, and then be able to measure my current state, and then decisions and planning that I can make that would, as you said, model different outcomes if I want to optimize on renewable. A great example of that is I noticed Amazon has a shipping option now where I can have the first thing as fast as I want it, and then everything to follow. I can have everything as fast as the whole thing can go, and then I can have it on. I'm guessing they've done some route optimization that says if you can wait until Monday, you can actually save this many dollars in emissions, right? So they're starting to put some math to, decisions that a consumer or a business person can make.
Sure.
So
And they sort of go from the consumer